Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special episode of, well, it's not Freeform Friday because we're live and it's a Wednesday. So what I say is it's Freeform Wednesdays, my dudes, and of course my dudettes. Hope you're all doing well. This was supposed to happen. This was supposed to go down last week. However, that just didn't happen due to circumstances that were out of our control and just, life just sometimes dealing us a real tough deck. But we're here. We are most certainly here. And whatever we had to discuss last week, we're going to talk about this week. But first, we are on the road, and I mean we are on the road to Slamfest, which is going to be emanating from Ruby Foo's, Hotel Ruby Foo's, over on DeCary Boulevard. And it's a one of a kind. It's the very first ever wrestling convention that Montreal has ever had. Guests include Barry Windham, Henry Godwin, Phineas Godwin, or Mark Canterbury and Dennis Knight, Charles Wright, aka Papa Shango, the Godfather, Bruce Hart, Mario Mancini, Ray Apollo, Claude Giroux. And Allan is here, and I'm just going to add you to the stage. Hey, Allan, what is going on, sir? How are you? We were just talking before we got started talking about what we have to talk about. I was just going to talk about Slamfest, which is going down this coming Saturday, September 19th at Ruby Foo's.
Soyez-y, mesdames et messieurs.
Well, yes, and speaking of SYMM, Mr. SYMM, Marc Blondin, is going to be there himself too. And by the way, he's got a show coming up the following night in which Ray Apollo and Claude and Tiger Jackson Dink will be involved in. And it's SYMMANIA. SYMMANIA is going to involve Jeremy Prophet. Jeremy Prophet is going to be taking on TNA wrestler Eddie Edwards.
Wow. That's the same Eddie Edwards that wrestled, I think, Seth Rollins all those years ago.
I don't want to say yes. I don't want to say no. You've stumped me, and I don't want to say something, and then I have to incriminate or recuse myself from not knowing what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you that are interested in purchasing tickets, I'm sure you still can, but I don't see why you would be unable to purchase them from Monsieur Blondin himself this coming Saturday. And the address is 17,700 Rue de Val d'Espoir in Mirabel, Quebec. If you are interested, I will most likely be there. And if you see me, say hi. Don't be shy. It's going to be an amazing weekend coming up. It's going to be an amazing weekend with Slamfest, September the 19th. The 20th, excuse me. The 19th, Freudian slip on my part, intentionally, non-intentionally. There will be, if places are still available, unique VIP event. So it's a BSK reunion show. So it gives you the opportunity to meet Mark Canterbury, Dennis Knight, and Charles Wright. In a restaurant setting, it's going to be Q&A. You have a chance to get your picture taken, get some stuff signed, and if you want to do some shots with them, well, do some shots with them. However, food and beverages, alcoholic or non-alcoholic, are at your own expense, guys. Just so you know. It's just the price of admission, but it's an event unlike any other. Saturday is going to be Slamfest. Of course, there's going to be AEW All Out from Toronto, Canada, followed by WWE WrestlePalooza later that day. And then to cap things off, September 21st, on Sunday, you're going to have Marc Blondin's SYMMANIA. And tickets are $20. Tickets are $20 for general admission. But if you want the opportunity to meet Doink and Dink, that's going to set you back an extra $20, so $40 in all.
Well worth it.
You bet. It is most definitely worth it. So now that we have that out of the way, Allan, what's going on, sir? How are you? I know this is something we were slated to do last week. Unfortunately, a lot of unforeseen circumstances kind of got in the way, and we were forced, or we came to a consensus that we were going to record or reattempt to record what we were going to talk about last week this week. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's hard to believe we're halfway through a September to remember. So we're going to talk about basically wrestling birds of a feather that just could not fly together. We're going to talk about when being the ring's king was not such a big thing. We're going to go back to the past and look to the future and have some Freeform Friday on this Wednesday. Loads of fun.
Yeah, or as I like to call it, Freeform Wednesday, my dudes and dudettes.
Well, yes,
because
they're along for the.
It's not all just a masculine thing; it's a feminine thing too.
Well, at least it's not this Tuesday in Texas, so we're happy about that.
Well, we haven't gotten to that point yet, if we ever do.
Well, exactly. It's these one-offs are this is what goes into the history books and creates fascination because the obvious stuff is what everybody talks about, but how many talk about the more obscure? That's why I'm all about bringing back some of the wrestlers that most people don't remember or never knew, and sometimes I even stump you, the great David Buchanan.
Well, I didn't say I was that great, but I'm glad that you think of me as great because sometimes I'm a lot of things, but great ain't one of them.
Well, don't forget you're an LWA Hall of Famer.
Oh, not just LWA, Allan. I am also a WCA class of 2024 Hall of Chops member.
Oh, I almost forgot. That's right. You're in the Hall of Chops.
And in case you haven't seen it, ta-da! Show and tell, folks.
Well, as long as you're not Chop Suey, you're the Hall of Chops. That's where you are. So that's great. That's another accolade you can add to another notch you can add to your championship belt, so to speak.
Absolutely. So let's kick things off. So I won't go over the results unless you need me to refresh your memory, unless you need me to reaffirm what we discussed prior. So we're going to kick things off. And I know at this time, a lot of people say this was WCW, but quite a few of us can argue it was still the National Wrestling Alliance or NWA. So we are going to be talking about an event that would go down on the 5th of September, 1990, so over 35 years ago. And this event would be the 12th installment of the Clash of Champions, which would emulate from the Asheville Civic Center in Asheville, North Carolina. And hey, that's where Adam Copeland Edge lives, just so you know.
Oh, really? That's where he lives?
Yes, that's where he currently resides.
Wow, good for you, Cope. But yeah, exactly. We're going to talk some Mountain Madness here tonight, Clash of the Champions 12. And it's actually interesting you brought up the NWA-WCW dichotomy because this period going into the fall of 1990 is actually when WCW and the NWA would go to court or threaten to go to court because the NWA was very dissatisfied with how WCW Turner Broadcasting, was portraying them. So this was actually the seeds of the conflict that where they were at odds, and that's why Jim Herd, who was then the WCW head of operations, told the announcers and others and the wrestlers not to mention the NWA. in interviews and during commentary. And basically, this is when you see that we're getting to the point where Sting was actually declared the last ever NWA champion, and which is kind of unusually interesting. And this is where WCW's lineage really takes over, and the NWA starts to really get brushed aside. It was actually during this exact period that it's interesting you should bring that up, because this is when NWA and WCW were butting heads and threatening to take it to court.
I knew I had a reason to say it. It wasn't something that I just thought I'd throw out of the blue. I had a feeling that I had to bring it up, and we would exactly have that kind of a conversation or that kind of an argument.
Well, that's why you got into the Hall of Fame and the Hall of Chops.
Well, there's other reasons, but I'll take it any day.
It's a contributing factor.
And at this time, we only had, well, only. I mean, I use this word loosely, 4,000 in attendance. Now, whether you look, depending on how you look at it, depending on the size of the venue, 4,000 can be good and 4,000 can be bad. It can be positive or negative.
Yeah, well, for Clash of the Champions, they only cared about the TV ratings. They didn't really care how many people were there as long as it looked decent on camera. I can't even guarantee that all those 4,000 people paid, but it would only get worse after this is the first. This is a real decline in wrestling attendance. I mean, the month before is when the Montreal Forum only drew 4,000 for the first time for their house show. This was not televised, of course. So the Montreal Forum had never drawn that low a number before. So I don't remember how many people the Asheville Civic Center holds, but let's face it, arena attendance was dropping for television, for a lot of things, but they were also coming off their biggest pay-per-view numbers to date with the Great American Bash 1990, and I think the attendance that night was a lot higher than it had been. And it's like Vince McMahon himself would have said, they had something that they wanted to see the people, so they're going to come out for it. Now, again, I don't know how many tickets were free and how many tickets were paid. Maybe all 4,000 just about were paid. I don't know the capacity of the Asheville Civic Center, but let's just say that in later years, in the couple years after this, they'd be lucky to get 4,000 to show up for a show without extreme begging and papering and giving out comps and tons of comps. And, you've heard the legendary stories how at Center Stage they had to beg people to come off the streets because it would look terrible on television. There was almost nobody there. They'd go outside the Center Stage for WCW Saturday night and just beg people. This is before, of course, Hulk Hogan came along. And they would do anything to get people in there. So I'm not sure if 4,000 is good or bad, but what they mostly cared about was the risks for clashes were really starting to go down too at this point. All throughout 1990, after the famous clash in Corpus Christi, Clash 10, where Sting ruptured his patella tendon, of course, and his world title win was delayed as a result. But yeah, I guess 4,000 at this point for WCW is acceptable. It wasn't a pay-per-view anyway. So.
No, it was quite acceptable. And yes, people were, at one time, WCW was begging and pleading people to go to their television tapings for free. And some of them even had brown paper bags with adult beverages in them, and they'd be passed out by the third or fourth match.
Well, it got to a point where I wished I had been passed out just watching on television after the third or fourth match. So I could understand that. I didn't need a brown paper bag to do it. The matches were enough to put me to sleep, as well as the storytelling and whatever have you. But one of the problems with ratings, let's say for this Clash of the Champions, is it's probably the first time that Ric Flair was not in the main event of the show. So probably almost assuredly, there were people who otherwise would have tuned in saying, wait a minute, Ric Flair is in an undercard match. Like, it's not as, there's no, and even Lex Luger, who had been in Sting's place from February to July had been pushed to the top of the cards. He wasn't in the main event either. So they were taking a chance on a wild card by giving Sting an opponent that nobody knew who it was and hoping that the interest would be there. But I can honestly say, without Flair in the main event, now in 1991, we'd have to get used to that eventually when he was fired by Jim Herd and went to Titan Sports. But at this point, Ric Flair was always in the main event mix. And this is the first time he basically wasn't. So
Right.
that contributes.
Did you wanna discuss the results or the matches itself that went down, or shall we just discard them and move on? I mean, that's entirely up to you.
No, I want to discuss a few of the main ones, a few of the interesting things that happened, and why, in fact, this whole Black Scorpion experiment stands in infamy in wrestling lore. I know you know a lot about the Black Scorpion. You've imitated the Black Scorpion, right?
Well, I've imitated the Shockmaster, but then again, Ole Anderson could never come up with an original voice. So what's old is new again. The voice that you hear me impersonating before the Shockmaster was used for the Black Scorpion. Stinger, I want you dead before I ever attack the man who rules the world. I wanted the Stinger dead and gone.
Excellent indeed. And this is the two-prong part of the title picture where Ric Flair wasn't considered the main contender. On one hand, you had Sid Vicious, also the Four Horsemen at this point, who was gunning for Sting at Halloween Havoc, but along comes this mysterious Black Scorpion, as you just did the voice so expertly of Alan Rogowski, the late Alan Rogowski, Ole Anderson doing that. And the idea here, too, is interesting because the Black Scorpion said, Sting, don't worry so much about Sid. Sid wants your title. I want your life. And this added like a huge, tone of sinister seriousness to what was going to be happening here. And some people ask, given how badly it went, despite, it did start very promising and Ole Anderson went to some creative places, but why was this Black Scorpion created to begin with and just thrust into a high-profile main event with Sting? And I don't know how aware you are of the reasons that this happened, but I'm willing to expound upon them because it is a very interesting topic.
We don't know why you catapulted the Black Scorpion to main event status, unless there is a big payoff, Stinger.
Well, there was supposed to be. But actually, the reason the Black Scorpion was created to begin with is because after Sting reached the apex and finally beat Ric Flair for the world title I remember the excitement of the Great American Bash 90. I knew we all knew Sting was going to win pretty much. But and if you look at the crowd and how excited the crowd in Baltimore was, and much like the Ultimate Warrior was being tried out on the other channel, Sting was going to try to become the new face of the 90s for the NWA or WCW rather, whatever it would be called. And they were going to try. But the problem is they hardly had any hot heels to challenge the babyface Sting for the world title. So they came up with this, or Ole Anderson came up with this Black Scorpion idea because it would give Sting someone to beat right off the bat. So the idea is, well, maybe they weren't going to reveal who it was, but at least he'd get a win on television. And of course, it turned out that the guy he pinned wasn't even the Black Scorpion. And in fact, a lot of fairly famous wrestlers played the under the mask role of the Black Scorpion. There was a lot of talk that in the end it was going to be revealed to be Latin heartthrob Al Perez as the ultimate real Black Scorpion. And he did do Final Scorpion. So that option went out the window.
Well,
Yeah, remember Latin
it's
Heartthrob?
just like the WWE today was. Sorry to cut you off, but it's just when you talk about the many people
Okay.
portraying Black Scorpion, it kind of reminds me. Even though this example is porous in comparison, but I must make this, and most of you who follow the current product will either agree or disagree and think I'm way off my rocker. It's kind of like how many different El Grande Americanos we have now. I think I've lost you
There
at
were,
El
but
Grande.
okay,
I
yeah.
lost you at El Grande Americano, which is
Yeah.
nowhere near the Black Scorpion.
Yeah. Well, to me, it falls just as flat. I mean, I saw the beginning of when they started to do that, and I was like, ugh. But anyway, that's just me. I'm very jaded about stuff like that. But yeah,
I know,
but
but I
again,
have
though, I
to
mean, you
bring it
had
up, and I have to have you give your jaded opinion. I have to, and I know I love you for that, Alan.
yeah, well, thank you, David. Now I respect the people that at least the main one that was under that mask, but to me, it was all El Petit Americano all the way, and I'm not talking about physical stature. It was a small idea that was brushed. Now, people, I guess you have to have a modern fan mindset and a real appreciation of hardcore lucha libre to maybe appreciate it. I guess I'm not that person. If you love the El Grande Americano character, then more power to you. I was pretty turned off the moment I saw it, and I'm like, oh no. This is like reeks of desperation and lack of creativity, and it's actually not. It's not. It wasn't even funny to me because it was kind of a bad example of real cultural appropriation at a time when we should know better. I mean, obviously the guy under the mask wasn't Mexican and had no Mexican heritage or links that I know of. So, or even Latino hair. I don't know. I don't know. Like whatever. I mean, this is who knows why they do what they do today. I can't claim to know much about it. I don't want to know much
Well,
about it. And that was actually one of the gimmicks that was the final straw for me.
what I can
I
say
hate. I don't want.
is
Well, yeah, I don't know. I could.
all I can say, and I apologize to our Spanish friends if I um, struggle to not say this appropriately. I mean, I struggle with a lot of things, but let me just say, appropriazione culturale del grande americano no bueno.
That's true. That's true. I mean, maybe they saw a comic book tie-in or some other media form that they could profit
Oh,
off of. But
most
that's a
likely.
very well, it sounded good to me. I'm not Spanish, but yeah, probably. But it basically went nowhere. And by the end, after Al Perez had done it, after Wild Bill Irwin, the future Goon, had done it, after Randy Colley, the old Demolition Smash, the first one, and Moondog Rex had done it. I mean, Moondog Rex wrestled as Moondog Rex around this time on NWA television. I think he actually wrestled Sting at one point, even as himself. But he was one of the guys, I think, under the mask. And I should never fail to neglect to mention, here's a wrestler we never hear mentioned, and now he's no longer with us. But Dave Sheldon, that was his real name, I believe, wrestled in Fritz von Erich's territory as the Angel of Death, a very big, bald,
Oh,
imposing figure. Yeah, I think he may have even had something to do with Rick Bassman and Power Team USA in the beginning. Now, there's a guy we never hear about anymore, and talking about wrestling storied past, the Angel of Death. He
yes.
was one of the Black Scorpions, but yeah, yeah. And so one thing, I love bringing up people that we don't hear about much anymore, and it's kind of unjust we don't, but we don't. That's why one of the reasons I'm here too. But um, Black Scorpion went nowhere, and they forced Ric Flair to kind of slide into it and Starcade, and that too was a show where Ric Flair wasn't slated to be in the main event, and yeah, so it was a big thumbs down and just a deflated balloon, and they ruined it. I thought it was really interesting along the way. They hired a real magician to do magic tricks as the
Mhm.
Black Scorpion, or pulling the strings behind the Black Scorpion to mess with Sting's mind. They dropped interesting clues that hardcore wrestling fans would have been very interested in, like Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1986. This is when Sting and Jim Hellwig came into Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling as it was becoming the UWF to wrestle as the Freedom Fighters, the Blade Runners, or they had a number of names. So some people thought they might actually get the Ultimate Warrior to be the Black Scorpion. There was talk that Randy Savage, the clues didn't make sense, that Randy Savage might be revealed as the Black Scorpion WF at this time and would not jump ship until several years later when he was thought to be too old by the chairman. So yeah, it's too bad because all it did in the end was make NWA WCW look terrible. Sting's world title reign became a flop. Not even reign as world champion. They did have a very memorable match the next month at Halloween Havoc. And if you may remember, at the end of this Clash of the Champions, after Sting beats the phony Black Scorpion, when the real Black Scorpion comes out and shows that Sting did not beat the Black Scorpion, but rather a disciple of the Black Scorpion, Sid comes out and confronts Sting and tells Sting, you should worry about me, and eventually beats the stuffing out of Sting to create heat for their Halloween Havoc match. So this Clash of the Champions kind of stands in infamy historically, both for the birth of the reveal of the Black Scorpion, which was, one of something that's, it's too bad. It had promise.
And that was the name of a really good book too that I got for Christmas. That was a really good. Also, the title of a really good book I got for Christmas some decades ago. And if it's since, I believe it's since been discontinued and out of print. But I'm sure if you look it up on eBay or if you look it up on even Amazon, I'm sure you can get a really fair price. And I strongly suggest you read it. I wouldn't believe every single thing that's said in the book, but still, it makes a good read. And if you were bitter, jaded, resentful with all the kinds of crap that I, as well as you, as well as others had to deal with in the 80s and 90s, I strongly urge you to read Wrestle Crap, the Very Worst of Pro Wrestling. However, one of the best things about the book is the foreword by the late John Tenta.
And Shark and all that.
Yes, and he talks about that briefly, but the main point was he gives credit. John would give credit where credit is due, even though he said Vince McMahon always did create a whole bunch of crap. He did always say he could make a star out of anyone, and the two examples that John Tenta would use would be Steve Austin and Triple H. And I know each and every one of us have our own dividing opinions of those two names, but it was
big stars. They are.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I used to have that book. I don't remember if I sold it or not, or it's one of the few I kept. I really did like the book. You're right. I may not have even believed everything that I read in it, but I do like how it sort of categorizes the worst of pro wrestling, and it's humorous and it's informative and it's pretty well written. So thumbs up to Wrestle Crap. But Black Scorpion, I'm pretty sure, had its place in that book, along with, of course, the Shockmaster.
Well, I would say there are plenty more paragraph and column inches given to the Black Scorpion than there are the Shockmaster. That I can remember from having read Wrestle Crap from start to finish or cover to cover.
Right. No, for sure, and well deserved. Shockmaster, is totally great. It wasn't his fault what happened, but the Black Scorpion was definitely really the fault. Create this magnificent narrative without even having a proper ending in mind, and then watch it sink and fall. And next thing you know, they took the belt off of Sting after that Starrcade. As a matter of fact, the story is they wanted Ric Flair as the Black Scorpion to the world title because Sting was considered a failure, much as the way that the Ultimate Warrior on the other channel was a failure, as champion, and in January, of course, he lose to Sergeant Slaughter at the Royal Rumble and everything else that would happen. But Sting said, "Look, I'll drop the belt next month. I don't want to drop it at Starrcade. I'd like to have a win over the Black Scorpion definitively, no matter how bad it is now. So, like, I don't want to lose in this particular match, but, you know, a few weeks later is another story." So, of course, they did that title change during a nasty blizzard in East Rutherford, New Jersey, when they were, I think it was East Rutherford, New Jersey, where they were, wrestling at a house show. And that's when Ric Flair got his title win and got his win back to begin his final reign, I believe. Is not final reign, the reign before the final reign over Vader at Starrcade 93, but his penultimate reign, I guess you might say, as legitimately the first pure WCW champion. The NWA name was not used at this point. So yeah, a lot of the clash was basically centered around Sting and Black Scorpion, but there were some other interesting things going on too, and one of them was the debut of Kevin Nash as one of the Master Blasters debut, and they were wrestling two of the best workers you could find, Tim Horner and the Candyman, Brad Armstrong, who wasn't giving out candy.
Rainbow.
It's hard to picture Brad Armstrong as that guy, but understandably so. But anyway, Kevin Nash did okay, but considering he was, a very raw rookie, but his partner had some of the most infamous televised botches in wrestling history and only lasted another couple weeks and then left the wrestling business entirely. He was completely new as well, and some of the fans were just merciless, even in Asheville, North Carolina that night, because when the smaller partner, Kevin Nash, of course, being the bigger partner, started blowing spots really badly, and the crowd started chanting that they were cheap Road Warrior ripoffs, because they were kind of made up to look like a bit like the Road Warriors with the face paint and the mohawks and whatever. And it was kind of funny because the Road Warriors had just left the NWA to go to WWF at that time. So it almost looked like they were just looking for a cheap replacement that couldn't even come anywhere close, even though that may not have been the actual intention. But the crowd was merciless once they could see that the smaller guy had no idea. It's like he barely got out of wrestling school the first day. And even Kevin Nash was criticized, like, why would you put us on TV, like, at a big show like that with absolutely no experience? If they had any booking brains, they would have, got them to get more seasoning and debut them later, but that's what they did. And this was also the debut of the Nasty Boys, actually, in WCW NWA, and that proved to be pretty prophetic, because even though they would only stay a short time before going to the WWF, they would, of course, return in 93 and have a pretty stellar run for about 3 years as a team there. But this was their debut, and they were wrestling, well, a guy who had just left the WWF and took the red mohawk out of his hair, Terry Taylor, the former Red Rooster. Do us your Red Rooster impression. Thank you. So Terry Taylor back as himself. It was all good. Basically, he couldn't undo the damage the Red Rooster did, and this brief run by Terry, well, not brief, until he became Terrence Taylor, the computerized man of the 90s the next year. His run wasn't really going too many places. Of course, later he would win the U.S. tag team titles with Greg the Hammer Valentine when he became the Taylor-made man, which was kind of entertaining, and Taylor and Valentine worked well together. But in this situation, Taylor was given Jackie Fulton, brother of the Fantastics Bobby Fulton, as his partner, which was kind of not a stellar way to debut the Nasty Boys or Taylor. Even Fulton, I don't know, didn't do him any favors either. So, yeah, the Nasty Boys debut is interesting to note. And believe it or not, you did have a Lex Luger Ric Flair match on this show, but it was actually the semi-main. It wasn't the main event, of course. And this time they billed it as, well, you've seen Ric Flair as the champion. Let's look at him as the challenger. And he's challenging for Lex Luger's U.S. title, which is kind of a big demotion for Flair, even though he held the U.S. title in the late 70s, of course, and all that. So, yeah, I mean, Flair versus Luger here did not have the oomph that Wrestle War 90 had earlier in the year, the Capital Combat 90 had, or, of course, the Great American Bash 1988, or Starrcade 88 with a really hot Luger-Flair main event. On tap, this is Ric Flair with shorter hair, as a challenger, not for the world title. It lacked a lot of the magic, that would come to be. But I think this is where Stan Hansen debuted and would emerge as a challenger for Luger's U.S. title. And the very unlikely feud between the man's man, Stan Hansen, and the total package Lex Luger would start at this Clash of the Champions. I guess I won't talk too much about other matches. There were a lot of them. It is interesting to note, however, that they had a women's match, which is unusual for the NWA at this time.
Yes,
But it wasn't the NWA. Yeah.
Susan Sexton, who was
They had the LPWA women's.
yes, LPWA would defeat Bambi to retain the LPWA World Heavyweight Champion. And now Susan Sexton is not a name that I'm familiar with. Bambi is probably somebody I'm familiar with. If we're talking about the same lady whose wrestling name was Bambi when she was asked to participate in the Dark Side of the First Season, episode 6, Dark Side of the Ring episode concerning Lillian Ellison, the Fabulous Moolah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember everybody who was on the Moolah Dark Side of the Ring, but yeah, she's not a name that was used that often. I think that was her probably. Yeah, I mean, well, and again, Lillian Ellison basing her operations out of, I believe, Charleston, South Carolina. So, and Bambi was from the South, and mostly made her name wrestling on the Southern independent circuit. And pretty tied in. I don't know. Maybe she trained her. I'm not sure, but yeah, certainly conceivable that Bambi and Moolah would have crossed paths because Bambi was from the South. She wrestled mostly in the South, and yeah. So I mean, Moolah had such a large hold over, until she kind of became exclusive to Vince McMahon, but. Yeah, I'm sure it's the same one. But what was interesting here is that the LPWA, which was headed up by Joe Pedicino, who would go on to Global. No, excuse me. He started Global first. Maybe he was just an announcer. There was this one guy who pay-per-view. Did you remember there was an LPWA pay-per-view in 1992?
Well, if there was one, we were unable to order it unless this was before we were able to order pay-per-view. So yeah. I couldn't
February 24th.
Give you a yes or no question.
Right. Well, the LPWA Super Lady Showdown went down on February 23rd. I was going to say 2002. No, 1992. And Susan Sexton was their first champion. She was an Australian star who came to America and worked her way up on the ladies circuit. Most of the NWA fans didn't know either one of them. They may have known Bambi a little bit. I remember in 91, Bambi came back to wrestle, I think, Peggy Lee Leather at the time when Medusa was starting with WCW at that time. And I do remember, I think, Bambi and Peggy Lee Leather being around at that time. But the LPWA thought to hopefully attract a pay-per-view audience as well as a television audience. They had every woman not under WWF contract basically working for them. And at this pay-per-view in particular, you had the big bodybuilding woman who was there before China was a thing, Terry Power. She was like a huge champion. Jim Cornette did the commentary. Jim Cornette did the color commentary for this pay-per-view. But they never had a second pay-per-view, and by 1992's end, they would just disappear. But they tried at a time when you had the World Bodybuilding Federation, as hilarious as that is, and you had Herb Abrams' UWF, and a lot of these this idea of this, that the independent promotion could rise up and compete with WWF and NWA, because the AWA was basically pretty much no more at this point. So
Well,
yeah,
just like
the
Ico
Susan
Pro, you
Sexton
gotta
Bandy
want
match
it.
didn't draw much. Yeah, you gotta want it, and I don't know how badly the LPWA wanted it, but they didn't do badly, I guess, considering they didn't do well financially. But I mean, it was a nice effort, and Susan Sexton, nothing wrong with her. But well, it's a footnote in wrestling history. I know Joe Pedicino and Jim Cornette were involved with that pay-per-view, and I think one of the AWA guys, maybe Mick Karch or one of them, I don't know. But it's an interesting, I think maybe next February, if we're doing shows, maybe it's something worth discussing, or at another time when the LPWA had a significant. See, it's a forgotten footnote. How many people remember the LPWA? Probably not too many, right?
Not even me, and most likely, pretty much nobody that watches our broadcast. Nobody.
Yeah.
I mean, is there chat or anybody that's watching this now or later? Does anybody, and I mean anybody, remember the LPWA? I'll tell you something. If you do, and you can accurately provide us with cards, pay-per-views, PLEs, and we fact check what you're saying, and if it all adds up, I'll tell you something. We'll give you a little incentive. First time ever on, I wouldn't say Freeform Friday, but Freeform any day of the week. We'll give you a prize. We'll give you a prize, and we want you to enjoy it. So we'll give you a little incentive to do your homework and do your research, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs.
Is the prize getting to watch a PLE with you?
No. Only a select few can put up or tolerate watching a PLE with me. But no. We're actually gonna. Well, I would say the prize will emanate from my sentimental personal collection, and it will not involve sitting with me and watching a premium live event from any wrestling promotion. That would be a terrible prize. That would be an awful prize. I mean, there are only a select few people that want to come and keep me company when it comes to watching wrestling PLEs in this day and age. No. The prize would be something from my personal collection, and I would make it worth your while. So here's a little contest.
Sounds really...
It's a little contest.
Well, I could give you
a little contest, and
I could give Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say there was only one pay-per-view, so there couldn't be more than one PLE, but there were other things that they did and other adventures they had. So yeah, if anybody
what
wants
were those
to dig
other
that up,
things?
you can win yourself a unique prize.
What were those other things?
Yeah, from
Let me know.
The sentimental. Yeah, you could have access to the sentimental private collection of David Buchanan. And let me go on record to say I absolutely love your company, but I hate PLEs, so I won't watch a PLE with you either. And it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the PLE. I wouldn't even watch a PLE with the president of Argentina or anybody. I just wouldn't. I don't. It's a random one.
I know.
I was going to say the Pope, but I don't even know if they have a new Pope yet. I'm not sure. So.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, all right, there you go. So it's not David.
An American. We
do have a new
an
Pope.
American is the new Pope.
Oh yeah. The guy from Windy City, the guy from Chicago. I forgot. That's
yes.
Right. See, it's so forgettable.
It's not Jude Law. It's not John Malkovich. Well, for those of you who are wondering what in the hell you're talking about, at one time there was an HBO series from legendary filmmaker, legendary cinematographer, cinema extraordinaire Paolo Sorrentino, who had put out a show called The New Pope, or The Young Pope, The New Pope, and there have been so many different evolutions of a pope. I strongly urge you to check it out. I mean, even though you might be an atheist or agnostic when it comes to Catholicism, it's still worth recommend. I still recommend it as essential viewing.
And the outfit's pretty dope. So.
Oh yeah, the outfit's pretty dope, as well as those red Pope shoes. All right, so
not to be confused with Dorothy's ruby red slippers.
Well, I think we
Speaking
got
of Kevin Nash,
we got a little
welcome
way
to Oz. Welcome to Oz.
Shall we pivot? Shall we return to wrestling and talk about the AWA house show that went down on the 3rd of September in 1988 in, of all places, Medina, Ohio? I've never heard of Medina, Ohio. Probably even the people that live there have never heard of it.
Well, I hear there's some funky, cold people there, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I get a crowd, which they had disappear. A few months before Super Clash 3, of course, which was the ill-fated pay-per-view. But at this point, the AWA booking office was working with Fritz von Erich's World Class, and they were working with the Jarrett and Lawler's Memphis promotion. I should mention the AWA was still doing house shows in Winnipeg, Manitoba during this period, all the way into 1989. They weren't drawing any people. You talk about 4,000. Even Winnipeg, but in this night they were in Medina, Ohio, and you may have to refresh my memory on a few of the matches, but I do seem to remember that Kevin Von Erich actually teamed up with Michael P.S. Hayes. Very odd couple that you had there, and this is because Michael...
Yes.
Yeah. And this is so interesting. This was the incredible time but they did it a different way. They had Michael Hayes split from Terry Gordy, turned babyface, joined the Von Erichs. So for the first time ever since this all began, when the Von Erichs and Freebirds were not enemies back like 8 years before that, Michael Hayes was, that's that famous picture of Michael and Carrie, I think both holding a glass of milk on one of the After magazine covers, that Michael Hayes had given up his Southern Comfort as Jack Daniels because he'd become a supporter of the Von Erichs and a fan favorite, and he was turning over a new leaf. So he might have been the baddest man on Bad Street USA, but he was rethinking who his friends were, and Terry Gordy would go ahead and form the new Freebirds with Iceman King Parsons and, of course, Buddy Jack Roberts. And they would actually go against Michael Hayes, who could count on his former enemies, the Von Erichs, as his allies. So it made for some very interesting matches. Now, it's worth noting that Kevin Von Erich and Michael Hayes didn't work for the AWA at this time, but because of the talent exchanges and the working agreements, these guys would show up on AWA shows. I mean, you weren't going to see World Class go to Medina, Ohio. And Kevin and Michael, who did they wrestle on this show? Kevin and Michael, who did they beat again?
The Spoiler and Exotic Adrian Street.
Wow. Now, this is also interesting. The Spoiler was working for Fritz von Erich into the mid to late 80s. I'm going to talk about him in a minute. Exotic Adrian Street, well, he's an entity unto himself who probably by that point in his career was mostly working in Memphis and for the Continental Wrestling Federation in Alabama. He'd moved over just before there was a Goldust and Adrian Adonis, basically. He was one of the toughest men ever in real life, but he portrayed this effeminate gimmick just to enrage the crowd. And he had a big, beautiful, tall valet that was his wife, Miss Linda. And, he would prey on the homophobic tendencies especially in the South, I'm sure, of the crowds that he knew, and he just did so well. I don't know if you're aware, but he actually even released record albums as his wrestling persona. There are actually albums out there for wrestling collectors. There are even music videos. If you check YouTube, there's a bunch of them. Exotic Adrian Street had a recording career as Exotic Adrian Street, not his real name. And he recorded some very funny albums and some interesting stuff. And he was a phenomenon unto himself. I'm sure that both Keith Frank and anybody who was doing this effeminate gimmick, maybe Adrian Adonis, that's who Keith Frank is, maybe Dustin Runnels, I don't know. But I mean, you could learn a lot by watching Adrian Street, one of the most legitimately tough men you would ever, like, this guy could destroy you in a bare knuckle fight, but yet he was portraying the most weak, effeminate sort of, he never came out and said that he was gay. It was just implied, but he would plant kisses on the mouth, just like Goldust later did, and of his male opponents. And he would taunt the crowds. And a lot of the more like very alpha masculine types would want to break him in half. But if they were ever stupid enough to try him, this guy could shoot fight like nobody's business. He was probably the toughest guy in the locker room, which was the ultimate irony. Like, he came up in like, I don't know, Sheffield, England or somewhere. Like, his father worked in the mines in England, and he wanted his son to have a crappy life like that and maybe die of lung cancer young by working underground in the mines. And he decided to go a completely different way. And there's a very famous magazine spread in the 80s where he goes back to England and stands there. They take a picture with his father and many of his father's workmates who have all this coal dust on them. They have, like, there's black stuff on them from the coal mines, and they're just like the most rugged men. And they're standing there with this guy's son, who's dressed as a woman, basically, or at least an androgynous figure, like with all kinds of frills and sparkles. He has pigtails in his hair, and it's one of the most hilarious magazine spreads. And it's actually been said in England that guys like David Bowie and Mark Bolan from T-Rex took inspiration from Adrian Street. They actually incorporated some stuff when Adrian Street was still wrestling on British television, long before Sky Sports and all that in the 70s. And so, I mean, Adrian Street is another underrated, iconic figure that doesn't get nearly the kind of buzz that he probably should. And at this point, he's kind of in the latter stages of his career, just wrestling for independence and regional territory. They brought him in, and the Spoiler is a very interesting guy, of course. Mark Calloway was inspired a lot by him, and his ability to walk the ropes as a very big man. I've talked in the past on Freeform Fridays that I actually had a personal relationship with Don Jardine, the man who played the Spoiler, and a guy who would never take off his mask when he started this gimmick. Remember, you were giving people the link to listen to Gary Hart's audiobook a few weeks ago?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Well, there was a chapter where Gary says he's the one who gave Don Jardine his gimmick. Don Jardine had been wrestling, I think, under a mask as the Super Destroyer, and he came up with the Spoiler gimmick based on a comic book. I don't know if the comic book was called the Galan, like Mil Mascaris. I don't think Don Jardine ever took off his mask. He didn't take off his mask in the shower. He didn't take off his mask in public. And he was just this really big guy. He was Canadian. He's from here. He was originally Canadian, and he, did very well wrestling in Canada at first, but also in Detroit, which is, of course, just south of the Canadian border, in Windsor, Ontario, underneath, and eventually made a big name for himself in certain areas like Texas, was I'm sure where Mark Calloway kind of got, Mark Calloway was in Fritz's area around that time too. And so I think Don Jardine was quite inspirational, but I am very honored to say I had a bit of a personal relationship with the late Don Jardine. And he told me, like, a lot of insider stuff, what it was like working for the various promoters. And it's funny, this was an AWA show, because the person he blasted the most was Vern Gagne. He would go off, and I still have the letters somewhere. He would write me letters and send pictures and say, Vern Gagne was not one of his favorite people, to say the least. But such an honest, interesting guy, the Spoiler. And forgotten by today's wrestling fans, but really even El Grande Americano may owe a little debt of gratitude to the spoiler, as well as several others, masked figures as well. So, yeah, proud Canadian too. Like, I mean, as a Canadian guy, so the spoiler and Exotic Adrian Street, what an interesting team, but they went down to Kevin Von Erich and Michael Hayes. I don't remember some of the other matches. I remember some of the other people. Can you refresh my memory? It's not a long card. It's a short card.
All right. AWA World Heavyweight Champion at the time, Jerry the King Lawler, would defeat Wahoo McDaniel. And Kamala would defeat the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant. And AWA Women's Champion Medusa Michelli went to a double DQ Shmiq, nobody cares, against the Fabulous Moolah.
Fabulous Moolah.
Yes, well, that's what.
How could
that's
the
what you
Fabulous
said.
Moolah get?
That's what you said in the notes here.
Oh,
Medusa Michelli went to a double DQ against the Fabulous Moolah.
Yeah. No, I know. I remember why now. I think this is at the time that when Sherry Martel had left the AWA and really got going with the WWF. Moolah left, and Rock and Robin came in, and Judy Martin was around, and Leilani Kai, the Jumping Bomb Angel. But Moolah, I think, was gone by early '88. After the Survivor Series '87. So yeah, I think Moolah was taking some independent dates. That's how this happened. Yeah, right. So Medusa, of course, was on top as AWA Women's Champion, but she would lose in November to Wendy Richter. That's why Wendy Richter was defending the AWA Women's title at Super Clash 3. Jerry Lawler, of course, had an infamous run atop the AWA, which would end another guy who had a very bitter parting of the ways with the AWA, claiming he wasn't paid. Certainly not for Super Clash 3, and which was a pay-per-view, regardless of how badly it may have done. And for him to go against Wahoo McDaniel is interesting because Wahoo McDaniel was a big babyface in the AWA. Lawler was the perennial babyface in Memphis. And even Lawler was the babyface for a while in the AWA, but I think they may have started to really turn him a bit because he was going to be going into that feud with Kerry Von Erich, and Kerry Von Erich was not going to be booed by the fans. So Lawler had to kind of sort of morph into a bit of a heel when he wasn't in Memphis, kind of the way like Bret Hart would do almost 10 years later, where he was a babyface in Canada and other countries in the world other than the US, where of course, he was a hated heel at that time. What were some of the other matches that were there? Were you telling me, besides Lawler, McDaniel?
Well, we talked about Kevin Von Erich and Michael Hayes defeating the Spoiler and Adrian Street. Kamala defeating the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant.
Well, that's a big one, too, because Kamala, of course, is fresh off his WWF run practically, the first one. And he was a huge name and certainly working in Texas a lot and all over the world. So Jimmy Valiant was still also off his NWA run at that time. In 1988, he was still wrestling for Jim Crockett Promotions. And yeah, I mean, that was just pure excitement, not the characters. But, you couldn't have more charisma in that ring than Kamala and Jimmy Valiant, two very different types of charisma. But so good on the AWA. They had to. They relied on talent from other promotions, but I wouldn't have mind seeing that card. I didn't even know Medina, Ohio, was a place, but I wouldn't have minded being there for that.
Well, I didn't even know either, and even the people, like I said, even the people that live there have never heard of it.
Maybe it's like Mudlick, Kentucky, where the population's 9, including 2 dogs and 3 pigs. So it could be.
All right, so here's
another
topic that you wanted to discuss. I know we're doing good for time, but I know we said we're going to try to keep this. We're going to keep this to roughly about 90 minutes for our own reasons. So we're going to talk about the USWA, United States Wrestling Association show that would go down at the Dallas Sportatorium on the 1st of September in 1989, so 36 years ago. Is there anything? Would you like to take us through it, or would you like me to go through the card itself before you give us your thoughts?
Well, you don't need to go through the card. There's one. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions to fill in the blanks after, but one of the matches I wanted to focus on with this show was basically, I guess it was the main event between P.Y. Chuhai and Gentleman Chris Adams. Now, Chris Adams, much like Moolah, was given his own dark side of the ring, as you all, and actually is one of the darkest stories out of all the dark sides of the ring. That one ranks right up there as a guy who most WWF and WCW fans didn't really know much about him, except for, later the WWE started releasing, stuff about World Class. And of course, Chris Adams had a run as a star enhancement talent on Nitro in the late 90s, but that doesn't really do his career justice. I mean, this guy, if his life wasn't what it was, he could have gone so far. He was so talented. And of course, now he's also famous for being the man that trained Stone Cold Steve Austin, of course, that even though Austin was not super fond of him, I mean, so his greatest claim to fame will be training.
Well, I'm sorry to cut you off. I know I'm being rude,
no,
but
most no, okay, go ahead.
Most pupils that have gone on to superstardom or some form of stardom have not been shy about talking about the complete and utter disdain of their trainers. And Steve Austin being vocal about Chris Adams doesn't surprise me. It's just like Peter Sinercha, Taz, was quite vocal about not liking his trainer, Johnny Rodz, Javarook.
Yeah, and actually one of the interesting cases of somebody who did not put down their trainer, of all people, would actually be Triple O, who's actually one of the, the only big stars that Killer Kowalski trained, like China, who he trained also, had nothing but terrible, pretty much, things to say about the great Vlada Killer Kowalski, especially in her autobiography and stuff. And Triple O, of all people, is one of the only ones who had good things to say about his trainer, of all people, right? Turns out to be him who respects the greatness that Killer Kowalski, another guy who I had the privilege to know a little bit, and to I was in fan heaven when he actually elected to read between the ropes, and he liked it, and he would praise it, and to me that was like, and this was not during an era where newsletters were getting any proper credence or respect. It was sort of the dirty secret of wrestling, or not so secret. And but no, you're right. There are many: Taz and Johnny Rodz, Adams and Austin, of course, Magnum TA and Buzz Sawyer, The Undertaker and Buzz Sawyer. Many examples. Well, actually, one guy who does actually get pretty good reviews is Eddie Sharkey, who did make an appearance on Dark Side of the Ring once or twice, I think. One of the old, he actually was, Vern Gagne, a lot of, not always, but Eddie Sharkey, though, is, one who does. But you're right, there's a lot of people who, anyway, back to Chris Adams. So Chris Adams here in 89 was basically, we're seeing Texas wrestling kind of fold in on itself. The Von Erichs have burnt their name because, the deaths, and then lying about Lance Von Erich being a Von Erich, which he wasn't, and Gino Hernandez passing away, of course, and all these things going on. And then that terrible expose there where Dallas wrestling was kind of exposed for what it was, and the tastelessness of Fritz Von Erich, sometimes profiting off the deaths of his own children by holding big memorial shows right after, and raking it in at the ticket office. And probably one of the biggest things that hurt Texas wrestling at this time was, do you remember when Fritz Von Erich faked having a heart attack at the Christmas 1987?
Yes,
Yeah.
And that was involving the new Freebirds, which was Iceman King Parsons, the Angel of Death, who we also talked about prior, Buddy Jack Roberts, and and Terry Gordy would take the microphone and say, Why is it you have a title shot when you can't even ride a motorcycle? And there would be a beatdown on Fritz, and Fritz would stage a heart attack because they were, as Gary Hart would say on The Triumph and Tragedy of World Class, they were hoping Von Erich tragedy would give them some attention, but that didn't happen.
Well, I think it gave them some attention, but the wrong kind.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nails in the coffin for the goodwill of Texas. Texas's love affair with world-class championship wrestling. So, of course, by this point, you get the USWA, Jerry Jarrett comes in, and there's a lot of, tension between the Von Erichs and him, and there's all kinds of problems. But the USWA tries to fill whatever void was left by that point by world class. And Chris Adams was one of the bright spots. I've often said, and especially in the early days of me being on Freeform Fridays, that one of the feuds I very much enjoyed at this time was the feud that Chris Adams would actually bring Steve Austin into and involve their wives and their ex-wives, Jeannie Clark on one side, and Tony Adams, the wife of Chris Adams. Like that, you could see Steve Austin's early brilliance at that time, and it wasn't just Austin, of course. Adams was super experienced by this point, and it's again by this point though, Chris Adams had been to jail for headbutting that pilot. There's kind of two people, and the Hyde was starting to get slowly the best of the Jekyll, and it was very unfortunate because not only was he a human being, but he was an incredibly talented wrestler. His super kick easily beats Sweet Chin Music any day of the week, as far as I'm concerned. Like he was legitimately like almost like a badass, basically, and he was great in judo, the way like Bad News Brown was. Although Bad News Brown, the character didn't show it too much, except for the Ghetto Blaster kick at the end. So yeah, Chris Adams was great, and look who he was going against. Here's a forgotten figure in wrestling, P.Y. Too High, and this is great.
I was going to ask you who in the head.
Right.
It just so happens that just when I say it, the echo goes off.
Yeah, hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Have you fixed your audio issue?
Okay.
Yes, hello. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Yes,
You're all still with us.
Yeah, for sure. See, all you have to do is say "P.Y. Too High." It's like a magic curse or something. You the forbidden words you don't say. Do you remember the incredible one verse but 4-line rhyme that Paul Heyman did about PN News when he was on one night on WC?
No.
This was kind of a classic. I don't know if I could remember it. Let me see if I can remember it. Well, when I remember, maybe next time I'll talk about it. Anyway, so yeah, exactly. PN News is unmentionable, kind of, and maybe it's like a drinking game thing whenever you hear the name or something. But yeah, well, who is P.Y. Too High? P.Y. Too High is actually one of the best wrestlers in regional Memphis history, who was a down-home Southern boy who decided to toss his Southern boy trucker sort of nasty heel gimmick because he was a loudmouth and he was ignorant, and decided to basically learn a new culture and refashion himself as a fake Japanese man. And it's not as bad as it sounds, because it was actually pretty brilliant, because he's the last guy on earth who should be parading around as a Japanese man. But basically, he shaved his head and he gave himself faux Asian makeup, kind of like Yoshi Kwan would do. Chris Champion and W's and you talk about cultural appropriation. It's pretty bad stuff, but it was hilarious in this case, because this was like the last. He was trying to pretend that he was refined and cultured, and it was actually Phil Hickerson, the really capable Memphis wrestler, who, because he was managed by the late great Tojo Yamamoto, who was a huge in Memphis wrestling, but was actually, I believe, a real Japanese guy. He decided to study the culture and basically pay tribute to Tojo Yamamoto, who used to wrestle under the name of P.Y. Chung. So he was going to pay tribute to Tojo Yamamoto by becoming, and you have to remember, this is the late 80s when America was fearing this big Japanese business, takeover with Sony and Toshiba, and, they were buying up Wall Street, like this kind of thing, where there was, it wasn't like the hostilities between the Japanese and Americans during World War II, but this was like a business hostility that they were afraid American jobs were whatever. So based on P.Y. Chung, the old name of Tojo Yamamoto, and also the alcoholic beverage called Chuhai, Japanese alcoholic beverage. I'm not familiar with it, but it either was or is some kind of alcoholic beverage. So he combined the two and became P.Y. Chuhai, a southern, like a totally stereotypical redneck, loudmouth, simple man who got under the skin of everybody, remakes himself as a Japanese guy, and basically even speaks like, and all of a sudden he learned proper English and can recite things that, let's say, Confucius might say, even though Confucius was Chinese and not Japanese. But so he becomes this.
Well, in the world of wrestling, that's been mixing up the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, the Taiwanese. It's a stereotypical tale as old as time. Nothing has ever been factually correct.
No, it hasn't, but that's exactly what they were almost playing on here. And this was definitely politically incorrect, but they were definitely very playing fast and loose with facts. The funny part is that Phil Hickerson, for having the class and tact of an Uncle Elmer or a Cousin Junior, was actually a really good wrestler. And may I say, he's one of wrestling's true survivors. He's still alive, even though he started his career in the 70s, early 70s. He formed one of the greatest tag teams of all, well, definitely of that decade, probably a team that most people hadn't have heard of. You remember Loverboy Dennis Condrey from the original Midnight Express?
Absolutely.
Well, Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson were one of the best teams that certainly regional wrestling had seen, but even I would say the national wrestling teams, and they actually came up with a great gimmick in 1975 because the bicentennial, which was coming the following year in the United States, celebrating 200 years of American independence. So they got together, decided, despite Phil Hickerson looking like a really inebriated guy at a gas station, like falling over on a bench, he decided he was going to paint his hair, color his hair blonde and wear very stylish jackets. And Dennis Condrey did his hair bright blonde, and they became known as the Bicentennial Kings. They called themselves the Bicentennial Kings, and they were so great in the ring, and Dennis Condrey is always great, and they actually got fans angered by, again, almost like Adrian Street, playing on the fans' homophobic fears in those areas, because despite Phil Hickerson being this really bad stereotype of a really solid man, guy who, if you looked at him funny, he'd beat you up or whatever. But every time they would take a bump, one of the members of the team would run to the corner and hug the other one, and and the fans were you can imagine how the fans reacted to these two tough guys, especially Hickerson, sort of acting as effeminate as possible. It was pretty brilliant for the time. Anyway, so Phil Hickerson had quite the regional career. A couple of years before he became P.Y. Chuhai, have you ever seen or heard of the amazing interview that Hickerson gave on Memphis TV when Sting and the Ultimate Warrior passed through as whatever they were called then, before the Blade Runner?
Maybe it wasn't the Blade Runners, because the Blade Runners name I don't believe was established until Mid-South. But no, I do not recall. Chat us up, and we gotta. Yeah. I know that we can go on and on about these topics, but we did say that we had to wrap things up at a certain point.
Well, that's fine. We can even skip the last topic if need be, but or whatever. But no, this needs to be said. Sting and the Warrior, when they were first starting, maybe even before they were the Freedom Fighters, they were Justice Jim and Super Steve or something. And they came into Memphis. They had virtually no experience, had just been trained by Rick Bassman. Warrior is actually physically bigger here, like he was in the Dark Side of the Ring, where they showed his old bodybuilding stuff, like when he was winning Mr. Georgia or Mr. Arizona or whatever. He was way bigger than he actually was in the WWF. And they just came in not even knowing what they were doing. And at one point, Jim Hellwig takes the mic and he starts putting down the wrestlers that don't look like him and Steve Borden, the later AKA Sting. And he says, I'm tired of all you flabby, horrible wrestlers around here, the Jerry Lawlers, the Phil Hickersons. And Phil Hickerson takes exception to this, and he comes out. And keep in mind, this is Memphis Saturday morning television. Like, there were like 25 million people watching, not like Raw's global numbers on Netflix or whatever. Like, this is like 25 million people watching local Memphis wrestling each week. And Hickerson comes out and he gets in the face of Warrior, the future Warrior. And Warrior's like, oh, you've never seen the inside of a gym. You're a loser. I could do this and that to you. And and even the announcer, who's supposed to side with the baby faces, Hellwig and Borden, says, hey, come on now. Hickerson may not have seen the inside of a gym, but he's won several wrestling championships and he knows what he's doing. So Warrior, like Steve Borden doesn't say anything, but Hellwig's like, oh, he just keeps attacking Hickerson verbally. And Hickerson actually says, you guys haven't wrestled the top talent around here, like Lawler, like Bill Dundee, like Dutch Mantel, because you guys don't even know how to wrestle. That's why you guys are not on top. It's not for any other reason. And don't think you're better than me, because you think I don't look good or I'm overweight or I'm this or that. He said, the only thing that you two guys are better at than me is pulling down your britches and sticking a needle full of roids up your hiney or whatever. And he actually says that they're steroid abusers. And that's the only, it's a classic interview. It's available if you look it up on YouTube, you could actually see it. It's something. And then Hickerson threatens them and they get in the ring and poor Jim Hellwig, he really couldn't wrestle at this point. If you thought he couldn't wrestle later, he really couldn't wrestle at this point. And Hickerson totally outclasses him in the ring. And it's just and again, it's a segment that's forgotten by many, but it's, here you have Hickerson on TV saying, you two steroid freaks, you think you're so great and you're not. And it's just amazing. And it goes to show how great Hickerson was. Later, of course, what we're talking about, playing a faux Japanese man as P.Y. Chuhai. And God bless Mr. Hickerson. He's still alive in his late 70s. So you got to give him credit as a standing legend from wrestling's past. Never had a career in the NWA much, certainly not in the WWF. But he did wrestle on some NWA cards when they started using some Jarrett talent, like in the mid 80s and this and that. But Phil Hickerson, P.Y. Chuhai, another forgotten guy, unlike Chris Adams. But Chris Adams is not remembered for the good reasons, because he was a tremendous talent. And it's just so sad his personal issues were basically ended his life.
I think since we're sort of pressed for time, the last subject we can leave for another episode, or we can leave for a bonus episode. But you certainly wanted to talk about the stunning defeat of Sting for the NWA World Television title by the Great Muta. This would go down on the 3rd of September, 1989, over 36 years ago, in an ODQ match in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah. Well, this was big at the time because of where it could have gone. Sting and Muta had a bunch of excellent matches in the summer of '89, notably, of course, a Great American Bash '89 glory days. The match, the pay-per-view where Ric Flair fought Terry Funk there for the first time. To get revenge, and it was pretty interesting because I think just like with Starrcade 90, they wanted Muta, I think, maybe to win the television title at the Great American Bash, and I think it was Sting again, who a year before the other thing we were talking about, didn't want to lose the belt, but it's obvious the Great Muta's star was rising, And Muta had the chance. There was a lot of pressure from the NWA bookers. There was the booking committee at this time, and maybe even Jim Herd himself, that Muta had a great future as a babyface because fans really started to love him. And they were even thinking maybe they could create a comic book out of him and start to compete, like publish a comic book with his adventures. And, maybe this could be a way to help combat Vince McMahon and his stranglehold on merchandising and stuff. Like, Great Muta was getting great reactions because he could do stuff in the ring that nobody else could do. Like, who is this guy? And they didn't want to boo him. They wanted to cheer him. So there was pressure to turn him babyface, but his manager, Gary Hart, the aforementioned Gary Hart, talked him out of it because Gary Hart wouldn't have had much to do in the NWA if Muta would turn babyface, because Gary Hart does not have the makings of a babyface, that's for sure. So he convinced Muta to stay heel, and things started to descend by November, December. Then Muta was asked to do that horrible Starrcade 89 Ironman tournament where he lost pretty much every match, I think, and wrestled 3 times. And next thing you know, he dropped the TV title to Arn Anderson on January 2nd of 1990. And after that Clash of the Champions in Corpus Christi, with Sting breaking his knee, rupturing his patella tendon, that match was the 4 Horsemen in the cage with Muta, the aforementioned Buzz Sawyer, and the Dragon Master, and they were the baby faces because the Horsemen had just turned heel, and because Muta had become so popular, Muta was actually cheered. But unfortunately, the beginning of the end is what you're talking about, is that Muta, even though I think Sting delayed it from July, it was inevitable that Muta was going to win a belt, and even though he never turned babyface during that run, he got a run with the TV title. And if things had gone differently, he might have had a different career in WCW besides just making occasional appearances, later winning Battle Bowl 92 Battle Bowl at Starrcade 92, and of course having some high-profile matches on pay-per-view with Barry Windham and even Steve Austin in 94. Remember, Steve Austin and Great Muta had a pay-per-view match. I think it was at Spring Stampede, maybe. One of those pay-per-views in 94, and but it was never the same again, and except like when they would show him in Japan, either wrestling Sting or sometimes teaming with Sting against the Steiner brothers. But this was Muta's ascension, and unfortunately it was kind of short-lived because a lot of people believed if they had turned him babyface, great things were going to happen, and he was great. But this was the first proof that Great Muta meant business by winning the title from Sting on September 3rd of 89. And some of you may have known or remembered that before he put on the face paint, he had done tours of duty in 2 wrestling American companies. He wrestled for the Von Erichs in Dallas as the Super Black Ninja, I believe it was. And he wrestled, I think, in the Florida territory in the final days as the White Ninja, I believe. But Great Muta, I mean, the potential was through the roof. And even though he had a victory here finally and got the belt, it was only a few months later that things went sour, unfortunately. And, he still had an amazing career, but it wouldn't be in WCW in the States.
No, it would most definitely not be in the United States. It would be in his native homeland of Japan.
Right. That's that.
All right, so on that note, we said we wouldn't go much longer than 90 minutes, so I think that this would be the opportune time to leave the topics of conversation here for this week. But we always got more. There's always more and more and more we can discuss when it comes to going down the proverbial rabbit hole of wrestling's past, as opposed to present and future, unless there is a present and future that we absolutely need to discuss. But for the time being, the past, the present and future doesn't really have much weight when it comes to our topics of conversation. So we always focus on the past. So having said that, be sure to, if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? No time like the present. this coming Saturday at Hotel Ruby Foo's here in Montreal, over on DeCarry Boulevard. Slamfest, Montreal's first ever wrestling convention. Guests include Charles Wright, Mark Canterbury, Dennis Knight, Ray Apollo, Tiger Jackson or Doink, Mario Mancini, Paul Roma, Barry Windham, Marc Blondin, Richard Charlin, Carl Leduc, and more, and Bruce Hart, and so much more. If you haven't purchased your tickets already, you can still do so at slamfest.ca, or you can purchase them at the door on September the 20th. Supplies are limited. First come, first serve. Be there. Don't miss out. And also, the 21st of September, as I said, SYMMANIA, Soyez-y, Mesdames, Messieurs, Mania. Sunday night in Mirabel. Doink and Dink will be there. Most importantly, Jeremy Prophet will be taking on Eddie Edwards in the main event. $20 for tickets. And if you want to meet Doink and Dink, Ray Apollo, and Tiger Jackson, $40. It's a steal. Hope to see you all there. And if you see me on Saturday and on Sunday, I won't be at the VIP event on Friday. You know, at some point, you got to draw the line. You got to make a decision. As much as I would love to be there, but if you do see me, say hi. Don't be shy. I don't bite that hard. On that note, he's Allan Greenberg. I'm David Buchanan. Thank you all so much for joining us. And if you haven't, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you can be alerted and notified every single time we go live. Thank you. Goodbye. Good night. Take care of yourselves and each other. Love one another. Love you all. We'll see you next time. Peace.